And we should be live. Right, let's see if there's anyone here. Everything looks to be going normally. Thank goodness for Screen Labs. Cool. Okay, I think we'll just wait for a few more people to come in. I know we've got a few extra writers, etc., and other audience members. I shall just put the call out to other people. And then we should be good. Great. Okay. We are good to go. Hello Shane. Nice to see you. To see you nice, if anyone's familiar with that particular phrase. Surrounded with loads of drinks today. I find that I talk a lot and I dry out, so I thought I'll lubricate up. So I might as well sort of lay out the plans for today, as much as they are. I thought if things are a bit quiet, then I'll do another reading of book number 1. And beyond that, I think we'll just sort of see how it goes, really. Now, my plan last time, it was a really good stream last time when we were talking about villains, which was good because it was a real sort of spur of the moment discussion. And yep, still alive. No worries, Sonny. Glad to see you with us. So, yeah, last time ended up as more of a conversation between both me and the people on the chat, and I actually thought it was quite fun, so thought we'll do another one, sort of gather people together. Now, the reason I wasn't streaming last time was because, last month, despite the fact that I said, that it would be a monthly thing, is because we got the go-ahead to open the shop officially, so we decided to basically spend a lot more time getting things ready and doing up the place. So the time that I would have spent streaming was probably spent sticking on plaster on the shop and making it look presentable again. Because we had some lovely things happen in the 3 months of lockdown, but all sorted now, which gave me the opportunity, now that things are back to normal and we're back in the shop, to actually start writing book 3. And the prologue is in its first draft, and that's all completed. It's going to be a long time, I think, until book 3 is ready to be released, so I won't... Exactly, something's come up. So it won't be for a long while yet. I think probably, as much as I don't want to put a time limit on this, definitely mid to late next year. Because when I first started out, I thought, oh, what if I work on a book a year? That was a really informed decision, wasn't it? I will say, I just want to, I'm not being an egotist, I just wanted to share the story with this mug. This was something lovely given to me by my mum, who we were at a flea market recently, because everything had just been opening up. And there was a, like your book one, Sonny, we'll get to you soon, be afraid. There was a lovely thing in the flea market. Hey, thank you, Jane. And it was all sort of ex-military themed, so we found a couple of things there that were interesting, but they had these tin mugs that have names and mantras written on it of different male names, so Mum picked this one up for me, and it's very sweet of her. That's been me sort of tea drinking very, very liberally. Okay, so my plan for this particular one is to sort of have a sort of bigger discussion about, sort of the writing process in general, because I found that we have a lot of writers in the audience of these streams, sort of on the benefits of being in the writers' community. And I know, for instance, now that she's here, and I'm going to put emphasis on you knowing you're going to hate it, Summy's been absolutely, killing it with her current work, which is Project Edgewater, plug. And now that I'm on third publication, it sort of had my experiences of that. And the good thing about being now 3 books down is at this point you do work out what your strengths and weaknesses are. I haven't had a major amount of reviews yet, but what I've found to be a nice running theme is I know where my strengths and weaknesses are. So, yes, I can see she's nervous. But the thing that I sort of wanted to sort of discuss is sort of have this sort of Q&A and the sort of back and forth between however many people are here. Now I know Shane, being in the writing community as well, you've I've definitely seen your posts around, and you are an avid tweeter, shall we say? So this is definitely within your ballpark as well. Because I think it's a good thing that we, especially in the writers community, have this great network that we've relied on and sort of taken into ourselves with our work. It's great to sort of get the feedback from different authors, help each other, etc. Because when I started, I wasn't aware of this, and I was very glad I found it. Now I know, Sonny, you haven't quite reached into the writers community yet, but I have seen quite a bit of engagement, which is great, especially at your stage of production. And Shane, it's sort of much the same, really. So when we, I think it's fair to say that when we sort of started our social media presence, I think all 3 of us definitely had a good idea on what we wanted to do, and then sort of went out and found as many different authors as we can. I wonder how fair you think that is, especially with the community being so tight on Twitter, especially, which is when I started the self-publication process, I felt the best thing that I felt to hand was that social media presence, as small as it was back then, and that is definitely on the benefits I think we have nowadays. It's very much a great back and forth you can have with different people, something that's definitely only a new thing. Break for tea. So yeah, the sort of communities that we've engaged in is definitely a big help. Let me just be really unprofessional and respond to a few things. No, this is how unprofessional. Right. So, yes. In a better social media climate. Yeah, unfortunately. I suppose the good thing is that now that we are very ingrained in our communities, we can always rely on them for support. Well, it's good because I think especially when you start out early, it's nice to have not just, your writing community mutuals as well, but also people interested in the same things you are, because I think when you have better engagement with people, you sort of by osmosis find each other's various projects. Mind you, there is absolutely nothing wrong with having a joint Legion Superheroes and writing community Twitter. It helps people know what you're interested in. If anything, I've found a nice balance to leave it in is that sort of people appreciate seeing your work in progresses, but also want to keep seeing you as a person, just to prove you're not a robot who forks out loads of different books and just writes all the time. Just gonna add this again. Cool. Okay. So I thought there were a few people that said they were coming in that haven't quite got in here yet. It's totally not that I'm stalling for time or anything. Yeah, art is definitely another great one to fill it up with. I think so long as people see that you're a creative soul, you'll definitely you'll definitely attract creatives. It's as I said, there's no real wrong way of doing it. I've found that one of the great things again with being on social media is you get your free advice. I've had people sort of ask me, have you looked this up properly? Have you taken courses in this and that? Do you know all about social media managing? I don't. I just know people who have been able to make a success of it, who manage their time on social media, and that's something I'm probably going to end up doing more. Yeah, and again, I think especially when you're starting out, sort of advertising your works, definitely posting as much art as possible definitely helps, because it proves to people that you are, again, not only are you creating and you've got things to show, but you also have like visual references. I found are great for helping, because it's all very well to post your bios, post your blurbs, which is great, and people will read that and be interested, but then they physically see stuff, then the interest grows. And I think instinctively we generally react to a visual medium more than a written form, and I just completely go overboard with the amount of artwork that I have. Now when it comes to the posting side, I know this isn't exactly the guide to social media stream, but as I said, it was writing in general, and I definitely think that the more interest that you grow and the bigger your sort of presence is, the better, because you can always direct people to various things. And that's why there's this big conversation about whether you should have your own dedicated websites or not, whatnot. I started on the route of getting someone we know to start a website, but that's kind of fallen through at the moment a bit. But I'll see if I can prod to see how that's going. But I think generally people will see a few links and they'll definitely know where to follow you. I think a few presences on different websites help generally, because it's always a bit of an uphill struggle whenever you're self-publishing, but I think it's not something anyone should ever be discouraged about, especially when they start new and start fresh. It's always a good idea to build up your audience, hype up your work, and then sort of drip feed things until you finally get that finished product. People will be interested then, and then you take it from there. I know one thing I've started doing that I intend to do more of is uploading videos to this channel. Yeah, that's a good idea. There's very good free building websites as well out there that I've seen many people use, and definitely reaching out to others in the community do help. In fact, I'm going to plug an author who's got a very good website comparatively to comparative to others. I will just find her because I want to get it right. I don't want to get it wrong. Right, this is www.lauraloup.com. She's been a mutual of mine for a while. She wrote the first review of my book, and her website's a really good one for sort of building a template. And if you no worries from work going in late. Yeah, in fact, if anything, I've found that Instagram's probably just as good, if not slightly better than Twitter, because of, I don't know whether it's the way that they lay it out or whatever, but I think I found that Instagram not only gets a lot more easier to navigate, you don't need that many followers to get more engagement, whereas with Twitter it's a complete miasma of like mess that you have to be quite tactful with. Definitely the best thing I think with Twitter is experimenting, like what time's best and what sort of time of the day of the week, etc., helps. There's no right or wrong answer, it's purely testing. I found that if I post things later UK time, sort of around 8 to 10ish, I mean, I do these live streams at 10 p.m. because it's a good way to start sort of hacking into that American time while still your Brits being awake, and other time zones that I can't think of at the top of my head. It's definitely, I would always say, don't be afraid to experiment. Don't be disheartened that your stuff isn't getting much looks at first, and keep going. That is something that I definitely need to do. Like, don't become a machine that just bots out posts and adverts all the time. Still prove that you are human in there. Like, and especially if you're on Instagram, I know people would appreciate a few pet pictures. I'm a little bit buggered on that regard because we don't have any pets. But yeah, generally I think the more diverse your content and the diverse your range, the better it's going to be for you. So that's definitely a great start for starting out authors. But yeah, so going on to the rest of it now. Because as I said, I've just sort of gone off on a bit of a tangent. Feel free to suggest any topics or ask any questions in general about any of the process that you might have, whether it be mine, yours, etc. And it doesn't always have to relate to this, but it can if you want. And if not, I'm going to possibly... I might put this to a bit of a vote, actually. I don't know whether to do chapter 1 of this, which is a bit on the longer side, or chapter 4, which is the introduction of the villain. No spoilers, but they are a bit different because chapter 4 is a bit more full of information, but considerably shorter, whereas chapter 1 doesn't have as much, but it's considerably longer. So I'll leave that to anyone's vote. If not, I might go towards chapter 4. Mainly because I get to be theatric and do the old man voice again. Because, you know me, I love a show. So, let's have a read of these. Now, I think, going back to the social media thing, before we go too far away from it, Dribble, the best thing to do, I think, is... I think we all are partial to villains. Let Sunny start talking about her villain. She's got a very good one. Again, I'm putting her on the spot terribly. She's going to hate me for this. But, yeah, I think... Now, I'm not sure if this is all across the board, but in my experience, the best ones to start for are Twitter and Instagram. I don't know why, but there doesn't seem to be as much of a push for Facebook. For me, it only seems to be sort of helpful for regionals. I think some people have experienced a bit of issue with Facebook in general. And as for the paid advertisements, that's definitely a case-by-case basis. If you think you can afford it, go for it. I wouldn't say it's something that you need to desperately push your money to, because I've seen it be the most key-on, key-off things in the world. Like, different people have completely different experiences with it. Yeah, you can remain silent if you want. Extreme partial to villains. I think we all are. I would say that a story is only as good as its villain. In fact, I went through a weird phase when I was writing about whether I actually wanted to put villains in works at all, and whether I wanted to be like particularly artsy and think, the story is like the villain itself isn't one particular person, it's the scenarios they find themselves in, or it's their own self-doubt or other things like that. I've quickly decided I wasn't particularly skilled enough as a writer to pass that off at first. Like, personal conflicts, I think I think personal conflicts can be a good villain of a piece, but I definitely think if you want first work and you aren't massively confident in your abilities or are a little unsure, definitely err on the side of caution and see if you can do something really different or interesting with a villain. Like, without giving too much spoilers, and apologies, these are just the rental ones because all the good ones are at the shop. The villain for this particular and the cover art villain of this one are very different, because I found that this hasn't come up in any of the reviews, but I was kind of anticipating that people, or just myself, would find that the villain of book 1 wouldn't be the most interesting part of it, because he is very much a Catalyst, and it covers into a very interesting sort of conversation and thought I had with various different authors and friends with regards to villains and characters and their place in the story. Because if you want to be really sort of analytical about things, I think you could argue that there are some characters, or most characters, if not all, depending on your view, in fiction that are service to the plot. It depends on how you are as a writer. If you think that you can get the plot to service the characters or the characters to serve the plot, it's two very different ways of thinking, very different ways of plotting. Because one is, right, well, A, B, and C needs to happen, how will the characters react? Or, the characters will then lead and the situations will follow. If you want to say, oh, well, I want to put this person in mortal jeopardy, then the plot will follow. It's a very interesting take, and I think there's definitely no wrong way of doing it, and there's definitely no one way to do it. So I found that definitely putting the villain in the first one as kind of, he is the villain, but in the future books he will start the ball rolling, because me being the unbelievably nefarious plotter that I am, constantly looking forward into the future, doing bits and bobs, plotting for the next ones, means that I can work out where the characters will go from there and how I need to set up. Because I think probably people would argue that one of the main failings of one example, Game of Thrones in its final season, was you've spent all this time with build-up, where's the payoff? And it's very important that, you have the plot there to take it all the way through, because if you end up just building up to stuff and either not following it through or sort of betraying your characters on the way that you've spent so much time setting up, then it's not going to be a very fulfilling finale, as it will. So definitely conversation can be had about how the plots move, but I think there is definitely a place for the idea of there is no one main villain. It is the journeys that the characters go on, all their troubles and strife becomes the antagonists. I think the best thing to sort of ask yourself is, do you want a villain or do you want an antagonist? Because I think you can probably have an antagonist be, not just one particular person or people. So it's a long conversation we could have, and I think if you're wanting to look at unique villains, then sort of taking that breakdown and analytical approach will definitely give you good ones. I mean, I think we can all agree that the sort of more sympathetic villains that you can relate to definitely have the most investment in them. Because I think we've all seen generic moustache twirling villains that don't work, or they do work but they're just surface level. No worries, Aurum. Happy to see you. Feel free again to bombard with any questions of anything regarding the books or writing, because I didn't have much of a, as you could tell by the ramblings, I didn't have much of a straight plot for this one, which is why, again, before I forget, we'll be doing another one of these at the same time tomorrow, just to make up for the lack of one last month. So whatever we don't get done today, we can get done tomorrow. And if anyone can't make that one, then you make this one, so it's great. Let's see, questions. Before I go too far off track, going back to what Sammy said, Facebook is kind of filled with crazy, but it wouldn't be a bad idea to use the site for promotion. Yeah, another pro is that it doesn't have the limitations that Twitter does. You can be far more... I've not actually seen if Facebook has an equivalent writing community, so I'll look into that at some point. Basically, as I said, the more far-reaching you can get across platforms, the better. And then I suppose YouTube, like this, great for quick videos, quick getting content out and sharing it, all work. Let's see. I've always felt like redeemable villains are so much more interesting. I bet someone taking the wrong path. You're definitely on the wrong path, though. Again, yes. That's part of the sort of curiosity with them, I think, as well, because I think people will generally relate more to seeing someone who, through various different troubles and strives ends up on a really bad outcome, as opposed to someone who was just, maybe they're born with it, maybe they're pure evil. That was atrocious. The redeemable villain, I think, was definitely a big inspiration of mine. It's probably because of all the Steven Universe I've been watching, but that is a good program for. I mean, I'd say that if you're looking at redeemable villains, that is definitely if you want to look at televised versions, that's definitely a good one. Because I think when you've got something with an outlook of there isn't really such a thing as pure evil, as much as there is people who are put into situations that then turns them bad. Because I know all the fan creations that I've worked with, I wouldn't call any of them evil. They just became it. Because it's the old nature versus nurture thing, and whatever your position is on that. She-Ra and Steven Universe, thank you. I knew I was forgetting something. I mean, if anyone's started reading my books, you'll know the influence they have. Aurum picks up the best thing in that as well. The villain is usually the hero of their own story. I like to think that if you were approaching this particular format of villain, I suppose the good thing would always be if you can imagine taking this story that you've written where these are the antagonists and flipping it. Does that change anything? Does the villain becoming the hero and the hero becoming the villain? Because the hero will always be the antagonist because they're the obstruction. Alright everyone, wish Aurum luck with the rest of his work. I know, no, I'm not going to say you need it because that sounds really pessimistic, but yeah, you try and have fun too. I find that probably the most people can talk about when it comes to writing when you have such clear antagonists as their villains, because I don't know why there's always such an appeal towards them. I know when I was a wee lad, I wasn't ever interested in the majority of the heroes because the villains were always cooler, and you're always attracted to what's cool. Yeah, and they take it too far, because I think no one wants a villain who is completely... well, they wouldn't be a villain if they were completely clean and shining. Even though I haven't played the game yet, and I do own it, a really interesting antagonist, because it depends on whether you call them villain or antagonist, it's that whole debate. A good one I found is Chairman Rose from the new Pokemon game, who is not particularly malicious in his intent, in that he always wants the best thing for his people. It's just that the lengths that he goes to. So again, Sunny. And I think definitely why that's appealing to writers is you can definitely explore a lot more of that. But then as well, there isn't anything wrong with the classic villain. Like for instance, obviously, as you know, I'm an obsessive of this bad boy, Dune, and there they go out their way to make the Harkonnens as ugly and as unpleasant as possible. And I think if the story can definitely include that, then that is also a great one, because with a tragic villain or a redeemable villain, you've got the appeal of, maybe they can change sides, there's moral grey there. But to have a complete black and white evil villain, it definitely depends on the story you want to make, because with Dune, the great thing about the Harkonnens is they are so repugnantly, unapologetically evil that you either find yourself absolutely hating them or kind of loving to hate them because of the extents that they go to. We're just still watching BBC's Robin Hood, and we kind of have to laugh at just how utterly repugnant the Sheriff of Nottingham is in that version, because he's so well written. Yeah, yeah, Shane. Again, the fact that you can have that level of engagement with both a hero and a villain is always a great sign. I love that this has sort of become the Villain Talk Part 2, but again, it's good, and the fact that we're having another one tomorrow means that we can eke out more conversation. But seeing seeing how different people approach sort of similar concepts is always interesting, because that's one of the great things about novels as a sorry, I have to drink a lot during these. My throat gets dried out too quickly. I find that there's definitely a lot of different ideas and a lot of routes you can go with these. And again, another great example of sort of breaking the norm of villainy. If anyone's read any Douglas Adams work, I will say you will definitely like one of their book from villains. Like the Douglas Adams books are filled with people who are antagonists, but they don't do a lot of what they do out of a sense of pure evilness. Like, for example, the Vogons that destroy planet Earth, they're doing it for a job. They were paid to do so by the galactic psychiatrists who want to stop the creation of who want to stop the quest for the ultimate life, because questing for the ultimate answer to life, the universe, and everything, because they don't want complacency in the universe. Logic like that means that you're never going to have your typical bad guy, and thus makes the proceedings more interesting. Best kind of free promotions talking about it. And sort of, before I forget, backtracking to the book promotion talk, I found definitely the best thing you can do is sort of just talk about it. You don't need the whole synopsis of the book sorted, but one of the great things of the daily and weekly discussions will definitely be beneficial to help getting your ideas out there and seeing people engage with them. And again, this is what I just love about this sort of social media climate that we're in. Everyone's basically has access to not only free feedback, but how I can tell you the amount of times that I've had people sort of come into the shop, look at the thing and say, oh, that's not for me, which is fine, you do you. But when you're looking for interest, it's nice to see, oh, that person's interested in so-and-so. I'm going to come to them with this idea and then see. I know Shane was... no worries, Shane. I know Shane was definitely a big help in shaping one of my characters, who I won't say yet because of spoilers. So yeah, just sort of wrapping up on the villain talk again, because I feel like we could honestly just go on for ages with it. Yeah, as I say, the best thing going forward that anyone's writing is sort of working out what your strengths and weaknesses are. Like, I know mine at this stage. I'm sort of writing the prologue of book 3 as I would books 1 and 2, but knowing that the feedback and what needs to be improved in that one will also help tremendously. So it's nice to sort of have that progression and sort of keep it going. Because I've got no plans to slow down anytime soon, and the more growth and help I get with that, the better. I think, since we were already talking about villainy, I think I'll use the excuse to do a bit of the book. Let me just find chapter 4. Chapter 8, well, I need to go back a bit. Oh, actually, no, correction, it's chapter 3. How many pages is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I forgot this layout of this book. Should say as well, I think I've said it before, but I'll say it again. The difference in printing on these two is night and day, because as you see, the thickness is, I think you can get about easily 2 of these in, because back when this started, this was back when Amazon was doing back then this was doing CreateSpace back in Amazon days, before they bought out CreateSpace, and this was the new KDP. I'm holding it upside down. This was the CreateSpace, no, KDP, CreateSpace KDP. So as you see, it's kind of halved the thickness of the book, which was great because it means that book 3 can be longer without it needing to be thicker, because this doubled the page length, that kept it relatively the same. Now, I have a feeling that ever since I did the old man voice from the first time I did this, it kind of left me with a bit of a sore throat. No, I tell a lie. It wasn't the sore throat, it was the constant talking. Great thing is that people said, "Oh, you can talk for England, you can." And said, "Well, that's a good thing about being being someone who reads and writes and talks about it on the internet." Now, let's give this a whirl. Before then, I'm just going to check on everything. Okay. Right. Yeah, for some reason, heroes are harder to talk about. I guess you can make your villains more interesting, but I think generally it's quite harder to get because I think heroes kind of fall into almost smaller categories because you've either got your typical hero, you've got your sort of, well, yeah, you've got your hero, and then you've got like your unlikely heroes, and then it sort of passes down into the average Joe type. So it's sort of, with villains, you've got a lot more shades of grey. But I suppose with, unless you sort of go down the Artemis Fowl route, where you sort of have a character arc that goes, so they start in one place and then kind of descend into another place, and by that point you've almost got an antagonist masked as a protagonist. So it's kind, yeah, I suppose it is kind of a bit trickier. It's one of the reasons why when I came to writing my books that I made sure that my protagonists were as developed as possible, because it would be so. And again, with your protagonists, you've got the author surrogate part, which I think why a lot of people find about and heroes don't have many motivations usually, yeah. When because I'm just thinking of the various type of heroes, you've got these sort of Arthurian legend type who are always doing it for the glory of their country, the glory of their people. They are avenging so and so, and they usually come from a place of privilege and like their society, or they come from nothing and then they work themselves up. What sort of challenge I found was Gabby being the surrogate sort of in character meant that, and one of the good things about Trem is that the first book is very much Trem being shown the human world by Gabby, whereas books 2 and 3 are Gabby slowly being drip fed, and to an extent book 1, slowly being fed this new Manzazu in the supernatural world. So through that, I was able to avoid too much exposition, too much info dump, because if I'm relaying it through one protagonist to another, it's gone back to that conversation about who's informing the plot. So in a way, Trem is not only helping to move the plot along by being the supernatural element, she's also the one that's giving the information. It's not like I've got a massive wad of text that says, this is this happened then and then and then. Whereas now it's someone recanting this to another person through hearsay, through stories. Yeah, I think if the sort of big appeal of a villain is the morally grey, so bad that they could be protagonist kind of story, then I think people generally kind of find more to like about the hero who is dragged along if they aren't too resistant to it. I think people will generally be a bit more hostile towards protagonists that sort of continually whine about their lot in life. Actually, I just looked at the time and I thought I'm actually going to be a bit of a tease, and I'll mark this chapter and do it tomorrow. Oh no, disappointing. Just because I thought we have 20 minutes left and don't know how long that will take. So that will be tomorrow. So I will definitely make note of that in the video description. Let's see what else. Yeah, going back to the hero talk. I think generally what people don't want is the reader's surrogate character to be the more I think about it, it's a really difficult balance, really. I can sort of see why a lot of writers sort of end up, and I hate the phrase, but a lot of writers end up with a Mary or is it Gary Sue? Stephen Sue? Gary Sue? I can't remember the male equivalent, but I think the reason why that's often claimed, interpreted, or is the case sometimes is because when it comes to a protagonist who's in service of the plot, depending on your plot, it will be quite difficult to shape something around them or shape them into the situation without an element of... Because I think generally people expect your characters to have a certain amount of plot shielding. Like, if you were in a fantasy world, for example, unless you're Ned Stark in Game of Thrones, you're kind of expected to get to the end of it, which means the majority of the fight sequences that you're in will only leave you with, at most, superficial wounds in a battle. So it's always a tricky thing to get right and to not have your characters be a bit bland. Because when I first started, when I was showing Trem to people, my first, and especially the early chapters, my first sort of point of reference when it came to looking for feedback is, are the characters, specifically Gabby, too bland? And I've often found that both for me and for other people, when sort of asked, who's your favourite character in this, who's your favourite character in that, it's often not the protagonist. It's often either the interesting secondary characters, the villains, the side characters. No plot shielding for my characters, they suffer, and that's what we love to hear. I think generally us as writers just have an inner sadism side where we create our babies and then hurt them. I love to see what people in the dark fantasy world come up with sometimes, because it can become quite nightmarish. And just all new levels of warped destruction. And that's what I think I love about sort of writing in general, and seeing the bliss and the abandon people have for just creating misery. Because unless you're writing insipid rom-coms or really bad erotica, then I think that there is a case to be said that we all kind of enjoy it a little bit. But when it comes to your protagonists, with Gabby, my kind of way to... And again, it's different strokes for different folks, so it might not work for everyone, but the best way I sort of started out, and then it developed from there, but sort of... Again, I don't know whether this is sort of considered a writing stigma or not, but I suppose the best thing to go about it was that Gabby did start out as a bit of an self-insert of me, in that the way I prevented her from being a typical Mary Sue who's good at everything is to sort of transplant a lot of both my own quirks, my own failings in situations, how I respond to things, and then adapting it for that story, changing where appropriate, because I know that in Gabby's case she's a lot braver than I am, because if half the things happen in that book I'd have hightailed and run long before it kicked off. So I definitely think if people struggle with protagonists, definitely starting out with how you would react to these situations and how you would be in this situation and this location, environment, etc. It's definitely a good place to start. I know that's why a lot of different genres like the fish out of water sequence, because it means that you can transplant someone from a normal situation, put them in another that's a very relatable in. That's kind of started out as the bare bones idea for certain sequences in book 2 and book 3. There's a sort of inbuilt way of presenting a new world organically without constant info dumps. Because I think, like, if you're a skilled enough writer, you can get away with, like, chapter upon chapter of, this is so-and-so in the year so-and-so, so-and-so conquered this and now it became so-and-so. As I said, it's different strokes for different folks, and it depends on the story you're writing. With me, as sort of urban fantasy, supernatural with a little bit of romance, the reason why it became kind of such a clustered genre is because I didn't go into this thinking, well, it's clearly going to have to be this and this. As I said, it's more... With me, it was always plot and character sort of working side by side. Once I'd sort of once I figured out what Gabby's character was, what Trem's character was, they both were quite polar opposites. So it meant that their responses to the different situations would be different. And then that creates the conflicts, whether it be conflict of interest or, their response to all the different things. It's, depends on the scene. But there's there's a very good variety that you can have there. While the heroes are, I would say, a bit harder to write, they definitely are a tricky one. Yeah, I'd say they're a tricky one to get right, depending on the story. And again, going back to Dune, they built up the lead character, Paul, to be this messianic figure and then really pull the rug from under him in later books, because that was wonderful deception on the part of the writer, because he basically said, don't trust messianic figures. Where was I going with this? Oh yeah, protagonists. So it's a very interesting balance. I'd say that if you can put the same amount of attention in your heroes as the villains, then it will pay off and equalise out quite nicely. I know we've been talking a lot about Sonny's Project Edgewater, but there's a great example of how you can have equal attention done to the protagonists and antagonists. Basically give them the same amount of detail, give them the same amount of love, and that will be reflected in the final product. And hopefully by the time that it gets, I like to think that if this story arc is done well enough, then by the end of it, whatever conflict gets resolved, you kind of hope that it either ends up with a nice compromise between hero and villain, or the villain ends up in a good enough position where they either get redeemed or, get their closure, whether it would be death or whatever. As polarising as it was, I think, again, because I think one of the good things that any writer should do is absorb different types of storytelling, not just in the printed form, but in any different medium. Because I think one of the best ways to do would be to study, and we've been talking about characters, but when it comes to plot, I definitely think look for things that are both in the genre that you are writing and not, stories that you personally are interested in. Because as I said, when I first said that I was writing a book, everyone I knew was like, oh, well, you're a sci-fi nerd. Of course, you've written a sci-fi book. Urban fantasy, come supernatural / LGBT romance. Which comes as a surprise to everyone, really, because I'm a massive Star Wars fan, I'm a massive Whovian, and I'm a massive Trekkie. So none of that crossed over at all. In fact, I've really had no real drive to actually write a sci-fi book, with the exception of War 29, which is a far-off project. And what I found that was really helpful when I was writing the book is that how much, not necessarily of the plot, but how much of the sort of story structure was informed by other things. Now, the plot itself is, not particularly one thing or another. And again, as Shane say, I read a ton of horror, and I ended up writing a fantasy and romance. Yeah, I think generally when we have a favourite genre, because I wouldn't say that romance is a favourite genre of mine, because I think when I was describing the plot to someone, I think they thought that my thing was a sort of more, basically Harry Potter meets the film Ghost, which I've never actually seen the film Ghost. I've heard a bit of the musical, but it sounds a bit too depressing for my taste. But the sort of process of picking apart and sort of studying plot is definitely one I think they should be teaching. I didn't take a creative writing course, so I don't know if they really go into the idea of plotting, but with my stuff being so heavily like plotted, then I think seeing how plot progression works in one thing to another definitely helps. Plus, if you know that the sort of things that you're following has stuff you hate, and then you can avoid it. Like, for example, I knew one thing that I really didn't want to have in this would be the scene where the main character has gone against their parents, they go back, and then the parents say, no, you can't do this. And then the person has to go against their parents, go against their loved ones, who clearly don't know what's best, go out into the world and then defy them on every corner. And then, whoops, you've then got into more trouble. Then you have to do the terrible reveal that all is not as it seems. And then you have to explain it to the parents. And then it's going to be a whole thing. Thankfully, I've avoided that. And I think another one I wanted to avoid at this stage, I think everyone rolls their eyes at the... I suppose this is romance. I've not seen it done in any other genre, but the characters have a small disagreement or a small bit of confusion that could easily be resolved, and then they have to mope about it, and then the sad music comes in, and this halts the movie for about 15-20 minutes until they can resolve it. The same thing happened in Shrek. It's happened in about 50 other movies at this stage. And I thought, if I can avoid these tropes, then it's probably best. I even got to the stage in book one where I thought, would it make more sense to include the thing I hate? And I ultimately decided with, it may make less sense, but it's basically what I don't want to include in it because it would be boring to write and hopefully boring to read. So I've sort of been avoiding a lot of those cliches. And again, I don't think inherently writing cliches are particularly bad, but I think when you do them beat for beat and repetitive repeating over and over again, this is the same thing we've seen 100 times, then it's obviously a problem. Especially someone who watches a lot of, especially who's a Brit that watches a lot of American things, there is some real terrible, reoccurring things in there that I definitely wanted to avoid. It's interesting that this seems to be a running theme, really, that no one instinctively is writing their favourite genre, either to begin with or in general. Well, as I said, if I was going off of my personal interests, my first book would probably be some kind of Star Wars, Star Trek meets the sort of Frank Herbert high fantasy sci-fi combination. So it'll probably be King Arthur's Court in Space thing. But again, it ended up not being the story I wanted to tell. As I think I mentioned before, the very first idea I had for this actually turned out to be definitely similar to a web animation, which I really should find one day, because I feel whoever did that saved me from writing something that probably wouldn't have come out as good as this does, for Trem, which was ordinary school kid, I think he was male, who is living in a house with famous ghosts. Lincoln, Alexander Hamilton, because I've watched a musical, stuff like that. But eventually I decided to mute that, although it is still kind of in the book in the regards of you've got the characters, the ghosts from different points of history, but they're a manufactured version of history, not the one we know. So it isn't William Kemp, the Shakespearean actor, and it isn't Marilyn Monroe, the Hollywood actress. It's Thomas Hogarth and Jenny Abernathy, who are these versions of. And the good thing about that is you can have fun, messing around with the history. I know that all the place names in my thing are mostly all fictitious. Mortsbury isn't a real place, but if I was to point at it in a map and say it's here, it would probably be slap bang in the north of England in a coastal town like we are. This sort of gives you a bit more freedom and sort of just more time to not only just be, as I say, more freedom, but you can also have a bit more fun with it. I've been able to take the mick out of some brilliantly bizarre British place names. And a few people have caught onto that as well, which I'm very interesting. I honestly am so surprised it's common to write outside of your personal interest. I don't feel so odd now. I know it's so bizarre. I think whether we instinctively don't have the confidence in ourselves to write what we love, or this sort of, I don't know, maybe it's our first time things just wanted to do something different, or maybe it's that inbuilt thing to challenge ourselves. It's interesting. I suppose if we are challenging ourselves, that's a good sign because we're not becoming complacent. in our skills. Sci-fi is so hard to approach me, especially hard sci-fi. Yeah, and that's why I think a lot of people either sort of take from or draw inspiration from one thing to another, because we're at the stage now where there is so little original content left in the world that I know Edgewater started as a barely hidden superhero spin-off but turned into a Ruby Lovecraft She-Ra mess. I wouldn't say mess, of course, but what you've done, I think, is the perfect example of what I was talking about. Like, did he start early? No, I think we started at normal time, but it's okay, Caroline, because we've got another one tomorrow, which will be same time. So if you haven't missed much today, then tomorrow will definitely be the good place to join in. Let's see. Yeah, going back to what you said about Edgewater being a combination, this is a good example of what I said of knowing what you want to write, looking at the things that are in the genre, both typical and atypical, and then seeing what they did and sort of, definitely not copying, of course, let's not say that we're all plagiarists here, but sort of seeing how they're inspired by things and how you draw into that. Like, for example, I've read enough to know that you have a whole, much like in a similar vein to I do, a whole other realm that is very different from our own. And I did a paper once at school about the concept of the other in sci-fi, about how it's often used as an allegory, whether it be a religious allegory, a political allegory, etc. And a big thing from that has inspired other people. I know it inspired Lovecraft, and that's how you got the racism thing going on there. But obviously, completely different from yours. I know you haven't got a single prejudice bone in your body, but when it comes to sort of looking at what other authors and other people who have created stuff in this genre do, you often find that you are then inspired by it, and then you are able to bring it into your own world, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, bring it in, turn it around and make it into something new. And as I said, in this age of barely any original concepts, the best things to do now is to take these ideas, like, for example, in your case, the Lovecraft Beyondian stuff, the sort of fantasy romance part of She-Ra and Ruby, and sort of combining them into one means that you've got an original world, because even though you've been inspired by things, you'll be hard-pressed to find that combination in this world in the twist that you have done it. And it's all about the twists, I think. Like, for example, Tren has, as I said, often been likened to Harry Potter. And I said that it's not, even though book 3 is set in a magical school. Because I think people see the sort of urban youth magical thing as being associated with Harry Potter. And while that is true, the difference is being, obviously, if there's not the school element, it's sort of more to do with the supernatural. So there is a whole sort of conversation that can definitely be had about how, and it's completely different from person to person, how one person can take the ideas of something and then take those ideas and make it their own. I don't think generally people have an issue with, because you'll often find that the things that you've been inspired by have been inspired by other things. So I don't think anyone usually has an issue with that kind of inspiration, unless, as I said, it's downright plagiarism, which I don't think people generally try to do nowadays, especially when it comes to the printed media. And with the sheer amount of access we have to any and all form of research, you can fall down a rabbit hole and have pages of notes that has completely changed the thing that you were inspired by, and now you've got something completely different. So when it comes to inspiration, I would say that the definite in is to absorb as much of media as you can and then let that shape you. As for instance, when it came to the actual writing process, I wasn't even looking at stuff in my own genre. I was looking at Doctor Who books because it was the one thing that I was interested in. And again, that's what I said. It doesn't have to be media that is in your genre. It just has to be media that you enjoy and what you find that makes it enjoyable. You know, if it's a book, do you like the way it's written? Do you like the characters? Do you like the way it's laid out? If it's a movie, you know, what is it about it that you like? It's all questions that will eventually feed back into it and then inform how you how you draw it out. And again, it's the same with characters. There's more than a few characters in my books that are directly or indirectly inspired by other people. As I said, my girlfriend's going to be in book 3. You know, it's very with a different name and supernatural powers. So it's very as I said, there's nothing wrong with picking up from real life as well. I think people will warm to a very personal story, whether it be yours or the characters. It's up to you as a writer. So yeah, it's a lot of freedom, I think, that this genre allows, and I think it's the appeal of it as well, that we are, especially with the joys of the self-publishing world, you drew from real life without realising it in the beginning. Yeah, and I think that will be reflected in the final product, especially if it's something that you've become so invested in with the plot and the characters. I think in the end, people will warm to that as well. And that's how you get an investable story, through your investable characters in your plot. And if it's helped from being inspired by real life, then, you've kind of killed 2 birds with 1 stone there. So as I said, there's no real wrong way of doing things. And there's no issue, especially in the drafting stage, about making tons of errors. It's one of the great things about the genre, really. Not the genre, sorry, the art form, the media form of books. It can be whatever you want it to be, whatever length, filled with whatever you want. There's really, and with this wonderful day of self-publishing, I've always said, anyone, you've even got the most craziest idea in the world, then, you always have to go for it. Regardless of if you think that it won't sell well or, it isn't what people want to read, you really would be surprised. And that was one thing that sort of kept me going through the writing stage, which was the only boss that I've got is myself. And I can look upon anyone for help. And this is, my passion project. And it will shape up to the way I eventually want to see it. And all I have to do is just make sure that I can get it from hurdle to hurdle. Be inspired by things. Draw from personal experiences. Think about how the plots help the characters and the characters help the plots. Draw villains and heroes from all manner of characters. It's one of the reasons why I think we are so drawn to sort of stories in general, just to see all these wonderful combinations. And I think I'm quite fortunate to know a lot of authors, including everyone here present today, who have done. And well, to be perfectly honest, starting this thing is a brilliant enough idea. The fact that you have an idea and you see it through and start writing it, it's a great achievement. And then the more you start writing, regardless of how many times it takes, how many drafts, I know people who've continually worked on their thing for years. There's no rush to get it out. It gets out when it's ready, when you think that you're at a perfect moment. And then eventually you end up with something in hand that you can be proud of. And I think that is, quite frankly, a brilliant thing. And the fact that it's become so easy for everyone to do now is, again, just excellent. It's even regardless of if you go down the route of publishing or not, publishers or not, rather. So yeah, it's I've gone really sentimental. Drafts, yes. And as I said, there is no limit on any of this to the amount that you have. And basically, you are going for it as long as you want until you think you've got it right. And then you go down whatever route you want, whether you want it officially beta read, officially edited, all these things that you can go down. And I just love that we now live in an age where, yes, social media has its dark points and, it's all become quite scary at times. But if you know where to look, then the sheer level of author support that you can get online is wonderful. And ever since I started these, I've never felt that I was ever alone in this venture, whereas a couple of years ago, I feel like this would just be a solo venture. I completely tore apart and rewrote an entire book and then did more drafts. It was so worth it. Again, yes. Because I've often found that you've had something in your head for so long and then you get it down on the page and you think, is this quite right? And then you feel, okay, well, I'll start it again. It's one of the great things about this medium. You can start again so easily. And it is purely an experiment. And then at the end of it, you've got something that you can, again, as I said before, physically hold, physically have, that you can then pass on to other people. And then you have your own piece of media out there that you have had complete control over and is yours, which is so much easier when you self-publish, obviously. You don't have to appease anyone apart from yourself and, knock on wood, fingers crossed, your intended audience. So, yeah, the writing process is just so long and arduous and stressful at times, but can also be really rewarding, really fun, and just a brilliant experience sometimes. And then as well, if you have a particular disposition like me, you can get on the internet and babble about it to other people. Yeah, as Sunny says, it is definitely a step-by-step process, one that should never be rushed. And I think we're all, especially in this community, very fortunate enough that we can all have that support from other people, and we can all sort of pool our resources together, find collectively people who are interested in our work and people who legitimately want to help. I know when it came to getting this on ebook form, it was a disaster. I downloaded the KDP app and it just wasn't working, and I was stressing out. Lost half my hair. No, my hair got lost in the stress for book one. Oh, so stressful, the actual release process. But and then you second guess yourself all the time. It's like, oh, did I leave a typo in there? I have to go through all 400 pages. But yeah, the big thing that helped me there was, the thing that saved me in the end was the fact that I had people around me who knew what they were doing. But yeah, I think on that melancholy note, I think we're all very fortunate enough to sort of feel like we're part of a community that legitimately wants to help each other, because I think we all know that there is nothing more important to both an author and especially if anyone is interested in that work, that coming up with a plot and then bringing it to life is quite frankly a magical thing. And if that plot is something that someone wants to read or needs to read for whatever reason, then sort of seeing that satisfaction in the end is just brilliant, really. So yeah, this was, as I said, a bit more loose, no real sort of topic. I definitely rambled. I'll make sure that there are notes in mind for part 2 tomorrow, which will be the same time, and I will make sure that everyone knows, again, same time, same place, and yeah, we'll continue to have a bit more of a discussion, and I will not be such a tease when it comes to the reading next time. As I said, chapter 3. No, thank you. Thank you, Sally. Yeah, as I said, tomorrow, chapter 3, which will be the villain piece, and we can continue to have our conversations about all manner of writing-related things. And now that those two are out of the way, knock on wood, I should be able to be more free for a wing July. Oh, good Lord, we're in July. Yes, so I will make sure that tomorrow. Thank you, Shane. Yeah, we'll make sure there's more of a schedule tomorrow, so it's less rambling. And if anyone wants to think up or save any questions on writing the author process, any of the things discussed today at all, either you can leave them here when we start it, or you can ask me on any of my social medias, and I'll save it as a piece that can be discussed. So yeah, I've felt that even though I've been incredibly rambly, this sort of more unscripted thing to sort of talking about whatever topic we get is been interesting. We'll see how more interesting tomorrow will be when I actually batten down and get a vision in my head, because this was sort of done a bit more last minute, so didn't have too much time to prepare, especially now that work's kicked up again. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining me, and thank you, Shane. I'm glad I didn't come off as being really boring. Thank you again, everyone, for attending. And once again, tomorrow, same time, same place. And I'll see you all there. Right, let's see if I can do this without making a fool of myself. So what time are you going to start tomorrow? I'm going to start at the same time, which is, if by your clocks, 1 hour ago. So that would be 10 p.m. UK time. I want to say 5 p.m. in America, but I don't know if that's Eastern or Pacific or whenever, so I'm not quite sure. 4 Central time, thank you, Sonny. Because that way I felt it's good enough that it's not a ridiculous time for the UK crowd, and the US crowd should be finished with whatever work they have, depending on their shifts. So yeah, I will put out the message again as normal for anyone still interested. So that's 4 p.m. Central Time, 5 p.m. Eastern. Cool. Time zones, they're an absolute madness to traverse. Right, yep, I will see everyone tomorrow, and then we'll have another hour of discussion, and then normal monthlies will resume, hopefully with a few more videos on the channel relating to book stuff. So thanks again for joining me, everyone. Hope everyone remains happy and safe, and